The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. Live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today for Monday, February 24th, 2020. It's MLS preview week in less than 6 days. Major League Soccer will start its 2020 season, and joining us to talk about Minnesota, to talk about the Western Conference today, Jeff Rueter of The Athletic. Jeff, thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Jeff, good to have you back. It's MLS's 25th season, of course. Minnesota's only been around for a few of them. But let's talk about Minnesota United to start. Playoffs last year, we talked a lot in the years heading down about their hard and their soft launch. They had a hard launch. They made the playoffs. What's the next stage of Minnesota United going to be? What's the expectations heading into 2020?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the past few years, I think 2017 was just, let's just get off the ground. Let's find some core players that can become a key part of the roster moving forward, and then we'll regroup. 2018 was a little bit more of the same tune, which frustrated a lot of fans. But as you get to 2019, the goal was to make the playoffs, preferably with home seeding, and then the expectation was just to qualify as the 7th seed or higher. I think if you're looking at 2020 now, coming off of a year where they finished 4th in the West, where they made the U.S. Open Cup final and made it competitive in Atlanta, where they fell to Zlatan and the Galaxy despite completely neutralizing the big Swede in the game, I think that their expectation now is another top 4 finish. That's the baseline of what's attainable to them. They are coming in talking pretty strong, saying that they like their chances of making MLS Cup out of the West. And if you look at the West, I mean, with LAFC focusing on the CONCACAF Champions League, there's a real chance that there's another team that challenges Seattle and LA. I think there's still some parts that are missing for Minnesota to truly be kind of in that tier 1 conversation, but they probably are right in the thick of that sort of tier 2 right behind that you could see with the right string of momentum and maybe a good summer acquisition really making some noise in the West.
Yeah, I guess go there. To get to tier 1 from tier 2, is it just a matter of having some stability of your roster, having sort of the players get familiar, that core growing together, or is there a piece you can bring in? Not necessarily tell me who that piece is, but a type of piece that you could bring in that would take them to that level this year.
Yeah, there's definitely players like that, and they've been in a very public pursuit of one of those such players with Bebelo Reynoso down at Boca Juniors. But I think that it's a little bit of A and B. It really is a matter of having a core that has a culture, that has sort of expectations of a locker room, that has had a track record of success playing together, not just playing alongside each other. It's why expansion teams, no matter how many ex-MLS Cup winners you bring in, it's never like it's a cohesive unit from the start, no matter who it is. But you do need that kind of high upside player. And if you're looking at Minnesota United, that's the one thing that they truly lack anymore on the roster. Their defense, they're returning the entire back six, the back line and the defensive midfield pairing from last season's top 4 finish. They replaced Vito Manone with Tyler Miller, which is, in my opinion, at least neutral, if not a slight upgrade, not even considering the league rules and the salary. But it's that front 4 that struggled to score goals, only scored 11 goals in 11 games after the U.S. Open Cup final. Really did not find a good vein of form down the stretch, and it showed, and it really cost the team in a lot of really close kind of 1-0, 2-1 games, which ended up going as losses. They got Luis Almeria, who is a striker who from Paraguay, who really lit up the Ecuadorian league last year, on loan from Vélez in Argentina, same club that Emil Assad played for. And now he's up on loan with a purchase option, and the expectation that he's set is to score 25 goals. Obviously, that's a rarefied air in MLS, but it does speak to the ambition. The hard part is who is going to get him the ball. Bebelo Reynoso was always their number 1 target. They were very public about that. They weren't shy about talking about the negotiations, and the negotiations as of now have stalled out. So it really is a question of where they're going to find that sort of playmaking verve in the final third. And if you're looking at those tier 1 teams, you've got Vela and Rossi and Rodriguez out in LAFC. You've got a lot of that work being done by Nico Lodero over in Seattle. Like, all of these teams have a player like that, and as of right now, Minnesota United is not among that company.
It's funny you talk about tier 1 team, and I'm looking at actually maybe let's call them tier 2 teams, where the middle of the pack in the Western Conference, maybe team from 3 to 4 to maybe 7 to 8. I'm doing my big game-by-game prediction right now, Jeff, and I'm seeing trends where just a few points once again will be crucial in the mid-table portion of the Western Conference, especially because of the closeness of I think, the moves of different teams. And, of course, the Galaxy is always a bit of an unknown in the transition, like you mentioned. But I do feel like Minnesota, like maybe RSL, teams of that level will battle for a couple of playoff spot. What do you think will be the key for maybe success in the mid-table Western Conference?
Yeah, I think that if you're looking at the West, this season it's far and away the stronger conference. The East is imbalanced. The Giants all look a little bit dinged, and then the teams that kind of slipped last year out uncharacteristically didn't really do enough to make people think that they're going to be back to that upper echelon. But if you're looking at the West, it really is wide open once you get from team, I'm going to say like 3 until 8 or 9. I think that you have 9 legitimate teams that you could say, okay, I think they have a really good shot of making a push for the playoffs. And if they were able to get to the playoffs, then they have, a real potential to shake things up. But if you're looking, what's going to be crucial there, defending, teams that can defend always will have a leg up in the regular season. They're just going to be able to need to find the attack in the playoffs. Inevitably, that's always how the league trends. You're going to need to be able to take points off of your opponents who are in similar positions. So I think nominally we're really looking at teams like the Galaxy, I think, are in that tier 2 until Pavone and Chicharito are able to prove that they have that sort of cohesive attacking dynamic between the two of them. You've got Minnesota, RSL, who you mentioned, San Jose, I think in a second year under Matias Almeida should be in that conversation. Portland Timbers, probably FC Dallas, probably the Colorado Rapids, and possibly even throwing in, who am I missing in this discussion here? Sporting Kansas City, if they're able to get things right with Alan Pulido leading the line. So there's a lot of depth. There are going to be some quality teams that missed the playoffs, which was not the case last year in either conference. So that's encouraging considering the new playoff format and the new league size. But yeah, I think that those away games at a stadium of a Western Conference rival are going to be huge for setting, kind of separating teams from the pack in that playoff chase.
I'm looking at, of course, the beginning of the season too. In the Eastern Conference, there's a team like Atlanta that have a very favorable beginning of the season. I'm wondering, in your research, and Minnesota also, how is their beginning of the season looking? And am I wrong in looking at 2020 where maybe a trend is changing, where maybe it's not how you finish in MLS anymore? Maybe it's how you start?
I'm going to disagree with you. I think that the start, just with the 34-game slate, and the way MLS sets it up and how close the playoff is and how forgiving the playoff format is, allowing 7 teams in, it really is how you finish. A team like New England can be just absolutely awful and still make the playoffs as long as they make a coaching change within the first half of the season. You saw the same thing almost happen in Colorado as well, where they were as bad under Anthony Hudson as FC Cincinnati was under Alan Koch, and yet they were able to turn it around and almost take the 7th playoff position away at the end of the season. So I think that the early season, it's good for getting some confidence, and I think that there is, as much as I hate analysts who rely on confidence and the it factor and all of that kind of BS stuff that doesn't actually change games. It does actually change how a team approaches games. And I think that that's big. There's no such thing as like wanting it more and that being enough, but you certainly can get some results in the early start of the season, and your approach to your confidence on the ball, your ability to defend as a unit, all of that stuff improves. So that's where there's value. But no, I'm not quite sure if a playoff spot will be won or lost by mid-April this season in MLS.
Jeff, you mentioned how you finished. Toronto was below the red line until August 1st. They were in MLS Cup final. So there you go. Looking at the West in general, let's turn our attention there and start with the team at the top. The Walker Zimmerman move, yeah, there's a lot of money there. I'm always a fan of knowing what you have, and rather than looking for something new. I think that's always a mistake in MLS, looking for the shiny object when you have a pretty decent object there already.
Yep.
What did you take on that trade, and do you think LAFC can replicate what they did in 2020 in the regular season?
Man, the timing of it certainly could not have been less ideal for LAFC, especially heading into that first CCL matchup. I'm with you on that. I mean, allocation money for all of the potential it has, for all of the kind of moves that allows a team to make, it's not real, right? Like, it's not like something that's going to go out and affect your roster immediately unless you have a move lined up. And I think that was the assumption last week or 2 weeks ago when they traded Walker Zimmerman away. I think a lot of us assumed that it meant they had kind of a TAM level center back who would be able to come in and maybe even be just a step above, maybe someone who's kind of like a Reto Ziegler type figure in Dallas, or even bigger, obviously, because it's LAFC. Instead, they've brought in nobody. And you're completely right that the MLS Best 11 defender that you have on your roster is probably better than a pile of money and no replacement player on the roster. And that does genuinely affect how far I think they can go, because the issue with the team last year was the defense. It was playing in transition. It was playing against teams that were confident in setting up a low block against them, absorbing pressure, really trying to bend but not break, and then as soon as there was a chance on the counter, really send it up. And what Zimmerman was able to do is he was able to take away those center forwards and maybe the less pacey attacking midfielders and really neutralize them on counterattacks and really stop them once the ball got in the box and they're waiting for a cross. He was expert at that. And right now they don't really have anyone who can do that job for them. And until they bring in a piece like that, it's going to be a real question about how they're able to absorb that. Now, factor in that the season obviously is kicking off this weekend. That player isn't there, and they won't have had any preseason to gel with the team. That becomes an even more challenging ask. So I think LFC is fine. I don't think that this is the kind of move that's going to knock them out of the playoffs. Obviously, they're still a top 3 team in the West, but it really does give me pause before putting them the favorites in the West.
All right, we started at the top. Let's move to the bottom. A lot of people assume that when an expansion team that isn't rich comes in, that they're probably going to struggle a little bit, particularly for goals, and that's my take on Nashville's roster. Nashville being the Western entry this year. Tell me what your take on Nashville's build has been.
They have learned as they've gone. I think that they grossly overpaid for a couple of players early on, especially last summer. If you're looking at them sending hundreds of thousands of dollars of allocation money for David Accam, $650,000 of general allocation money for Anibal Godoy. But then they've made some really good moves for Walker Zimmerman. And I know it's pricey, but those sort of players are not usually available to teams to acquire on the trade market. But now we're at the second straight winter where a Defender of the Year candidate has gone after Iko Para the winter beforehand. I think that you look at the Dax McCarty deal for what they paid for him, it's just a joke. That's usually what teams will swap to move up in the allocation order, and they're able to get, like an MLS Best 11 caliber defensive midfielder who still should have a year or two left in his legs before he even starts to dip, at which point he'll still be valuable because of how he plays. So I do like some of what they do. Will we be able to see Gary Smith kind of readjust to life in MLS? Keep in mind, he was the coach who helped the Colorado Rapids win in that kind of surprising 2010 MLS Cup. But is that the right coach to be able to kind of jumpstart a culture in MLS? Who knows? But that's a question about every single coach. That's not necessarily a knock against him. And if you're looking at the attack, I really don't believe in a front four where you've got, I think that they're going to really struggle there. Yeah, they've got Hani Mukhtar, but is he going to be able to do a lot of that work on his own? I'm not sure. Randall Leal might be a year away. So then you're really putting pressure on guys like Abu Danladi, Dominic Baji, Daniel Rios at striker. None of these are marquee options. I think I'd probably prefer Rios. I think he has the most potential to become like a 12 to 14 goal scorer with the right service behind him. But I do think that they'll struggle. I don't think this is a playoff push for them, but I do see some pieces on this core that should be able to hold on for a year or two as they gradually move towards that sort of trajectory.
Looking at the bottom of the Western Conference, teams like Vancouver, Colorado have been struggling over the last couple of years. When you look at Vancouver, Colorado for 2020, is there any of these two teams that will come out of the bottom of the Western Conference, or are we par for the course in 2020?
Colorado made some really good strides down the stretch. Obviously made it until the final day where they were still mathematically eligible to make the postseason, even though it was highly improbable that all four results would have gone their way. I think Robin Fraser has done a tremendous job since he took over mid-season for Connor Casey, who himself was the interim after Anthony Hudson was fired. And I like a lot of the moves that they got. I mean, a young center back pairing with league experience like Lalas Abubakar and Austin Trusty, it's really hard to kind of luck into that. And so I think that there were some really good moves that were made by that Obviously, the attack is still going to be the question there. There isn't really that super dynamic player that you can look at and say, okay, they're going to be able to carry this team. But attack has never really been, as much as Porg Smith likes to say that that's part of the Rapids way, it really hasn't been, and that's fine. They just need to be able to have guys like Kellen Acosta maybe show much more of what made him kind of a U.S. men's national team prospect a few years back, and we haven't really seen that from him in a long time. It means that someone like Jonathan Lewis is really coming into his own rich vein of form. Sam Nicholson is showing some of the potential he first showed when he joined the league with Minnesota, but given more consistent minutes, actually playing out wide. And then at striker, it's about Kai Kamara finishing his chances, which I would never bet against him finishing his chances, and Diego Rubio showing that last season wasn't a fluke. As for Vancouver, I mean, there's still some good potential there. I think that Jordi Reyna on his day is still a very capable attacking midfielder. The hard part is that his day doesn't seem to be pretty regular, and he will fade out of games to a greater extent than most key playmakers in Major League Soccer. Lucas Cavallini is a heck of a pickup for any team. Ali Adnan is obviously does his best impressions of Marcelo anytime he can from left back. But I think that there's still going to be a pretty upward battle for Marc Dos Santos to be able to get the playoffs out of this team. Do I expect them to be the obvious bottom feeders like they were last season? Not necessarily. I think that they're going to be a little more competitive, but I still think it's a year early for a team that frankly lacks a lot of that high upside, which I just spoke about earlier in the segment with teams like Minnesota as a reason that it's pretty easy to dismiss them.
I'm doing my big prediction for this year and going game by game, looking at matchups. And as much as I agree with you, like team like Colorado did get better, there's a lot of good teams in the Western Conference, and any given game, it's hard to bet against LAFC. It's hard to bet against a Portland when you see the good things they could be doing under Gio, and then you see San Jose and how they began last year, and they evolved, and then of course they had a dip. There's a lot of moving pieces. So here's my question in two parts for you, Jeff, in closing of this segment of the show. Who do you think is going to be the loser of the battle of the Western Conference? Maybe a team that we anticipate is going to have a better season, but unfortunately it won't pan out. And who do you see finishing on top of the Western Conference on October 4th?
Conveniently, I think these two teams are pretty well linked. So we'll start with who's going to falter, and I've actually got the Portland Timbers outside of the playoff places right now. I think that the saga and just the prolonged negotiations with Diego Valeri, that does a number not just on the player who is a model professional, and I'm sure that he'll be able to adapt, and he's obviously going to be thrilled that his family is still in Portland, but that takes a toll on the locker room and on a player and on a family, and it really does make that readjustment and that trust in that club kind of ding a little bit. So I think that's one area that I think they'll struggle. And if you're looking at the players that they brought in, Niezgoda coming in from Legia Warsaw, are we sure that he's going to be able to be that sort of player who can step in and get them goals, which again, they were another team that really needed them last year? I'm not sure. There isn't a great track record of success for Polish players, Polish attackers, especially coming to Major League Soccer. Just ask the Chicago Fire. So that's a question. Yemi Chara coming from joining the team and joining his brother from Atletico Mineiro. It's a great story. It's a great sort of, kind of pickup just for the memes and for the culture to have the Chara brothers, Diego and Yemi back together. But he scored 4 goals in 40 games with Atletico Mineiro. He's been out of the picture for Colombia for a while, I think pretty much since during the lead up to the Russian World Cup in 2018. He hasn't been that sort of high upside player. He's been consistent. He's offered a lot on the wing in terms of two-way play, but he hasn't necessarily been the player who's going to unlock the attack. So then you're putting full pressure back on the shoulders of Sebastian Blanco, another player who can get neutralized by the right game plan pretty effectively, more than most leading men in Major League Soccer. And so I think that there's going to be some struggle. And then, of course, with all those both of those attacking additions coming and wanting to play at striker, sometimes especially Niezgoda, much more than Chara, where does that leave Jeremy Abobasi? And is he going to be able to step in and get some goals? Because that's been kind of his story since he joined MLS in the 2017 Super Draft, is whether or not he will be able to get consistent minutes to get that confidence to score. Now it doesn't look like he's going to have that, and Andy Polo is still lurking around. And Daron Asprilla is still there too. So I think that they're going to really struggle. It's a big year Year 3, they took a huge step back in 2019 after making MLS Cup in 2018, and I think that they're going to take another step back. If I'm looking at who's going to be the best team in the West, it's not LAFC for me. It's the Seattle Sounders. Obviously hard to bet against a defending champion, but a lot of people like to bet against the Sounders. Once these seasons start, they look at them and say, okay, yeah, but they don't have Carlos Vela. They don't have Zlatan. They don't have Chicharito. They don't have that sort of player. But that's never really been their identity. I think that, yeah, they had Clint Dempsey and Obafemi Martins, and probably my favorite era of any club in MLS. That Obadu's time was just must-see television. But if you're looking at, the potential of this roster, they didn't really lose anybody of consequence. They kept such a good core. They all believe in Brian Schmetzer's system. They're all bought into what the club is trying to do. They're all bought in to winning every trophy available to them. And then they went out and they made some savvy pickups. Just last week, they brought in Miguel Ibarra, who had been a free agent for a long time. I think kind of one of those hostages of the CBA negotiations where teams weren't quite sure how that mid-level salary player would fit into their roster. He's going to be a fantastic piece to be able to have as they have to rotate squads between the CCL and the league. They shouldn't. Knowing them, they probably will lose some games early in the season. They shouldn't, but they are much better set up to handle those by bringing in players like Ibarra, by bringing in other players as they have this offseason. If you're looking at the roster too, they brought back Alex Rodon as a pretty low risk kind of rotational right back. They're going to put him. Joao Paulo in the midfield as another designated player joining this team. That's pretty strong. You've got Jovan Jones still lurking around. I really like what this team did in the offseason, and I certainly think that they have enough potential to win the Western Conference outright. And then once you get to the playoffs, obviously anything goes.
Fun times ahead, Jeff. I can't believe the season is only, a few days ahead of us. Of course, there's some CCL in the meantime to whet our appetite. But on Saturday, Major League Soccer kicks off its 25 season. You can follow Jeff's work on The Athletic, a well-worth subscription at theathletic.com. And you can follow Jeff on social media at Jeff Rueter. Jeff, thank you for your time today. We wish you a great preview week and a great Major League Soccer kickoff.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
And we'll be right back after this short break.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. I'm Kevin Laramee, joined by Duane Rollins. As always, you can follow us on social media at 24th Minute for Duane, at Kev Laramee for myself, and at Soccer Today SPN for this show. Preview week, all week long. Saturday, Major League Soccer kicks off its 25th season. We're excited, as you can tell. Thanks to Jeff for his time today. We're going to have some great guests all week long, some surprise guests. And Duane, this is our most extensive preview week we have done in the history of this show. On a game-by-game situation, I've been working hard on numbers, and for patrons only, you'll have actually my entire database available for you, my very long spreadsheet, game by game, giving you an optic. Of course, it's all taken with a grain of salt. It's all predictions, and it's based on some off-season move, what we think about the season. It's based also travel, so what I call the circumstances, so the game before, the game after, the travel situation, and of course big injuries or no, like DC. Of course, fortunately, the injuries to Paul Arriola does change things. So there's a lot of interesting aspect of this prediction, and I'm seeing trends. I'm seeing a lot of great things. So the next couple of days, of course, Friday will be our big prediction show where Duane and I will predict who wins everything and who goes home and whatever happens in Major League Soccer in 2020. If you can't tell, I'm excited, Duane.
Yeah, I can tell. And the season has started. I know that the regular season hasn't, but the fact that there's midweek games and then we're immediately going into a weekend of all games, it's here. We don't have to wait no longer. This is a week. You can start with you got Champions League in Europe this week too. Yeah. You've got Liverpool playing this afternoon for, if you're into that sort of thing, it's going to be a good week of soccer, and it's going to be a good 8 months.
I wish
run from here.
The famous song of Wyclef. That's what I told my significant other this week. I'm like, I love you, but I'm gone till November because the regular season has started. And yeah, you should see all the football I need to watch in the next few days, but it's what it's all about, and we love what we do. Look out for premium podcast on Off the Woodworks. Of course, the $5 tier with the Montreal Impact specific podcast, the Solitude Soccer podcast, and more on the SPN Extra feed all week long. I'll be traveling to different events this week in Montreal, and of course Wednesday I'll be at the Olympic Stadium, Saturday also. All the bonus audio that I gather will be for patrons on our Patreon feed at patreon.com/sports podcasting network. Now, before we continue, Duane, and just talk a little bit about some bits and bites on this Monday morning, how do you feel on Monday ahead of preview week?
I feel that I haven't completely got a handle on the season yet. That LAFC, the Zimmerman trade, I talk about it a lot because it really threw me in terms of my predictions, because I really was prepared to just say that for the second straight year that I was picking LAFC to win it all. And now I'm not sure. I mean, I might still, because they are still very good and they do have a ton of cash to spend. But as I said to Jeff in the interview, like we say, points in the board or points in the pocket. A player on the board is a player in your pocket, so to speak. A player in the field is a player in your pocket. So that's what I like to think of it than that. I'd rather know what I have than dream big. I watched a team in my own backyard for years constantly get bored with the play toy they had and throw it into the garbage and go looking for a better one. And increasingly that toy became less and less functional, yeah. Right?
Well, what is it? The famous Macaulay Culkin Home Alone 2 rollerblade skate? Actually, it was skates back then because rollerblade didn't exist. So the skate analogy where I had this nice pair of skates that's so nice that I didn't want to use them too much, so I left them indoors and I left them in the closet, and guess what? They were too small for me at the end. I guess it's that famous analogy. Here's a couple of tidbits of information. Jukka Raitala, the newest captain of the Montreal Impact. Some people think it's a controversy. Some people think it is what it is. And how important is an actual captain in soccer? And maybe that's a real question we should ask soccer players in the future when we have a one-on-one interview. But Jukka Raitala, the new captain of the Montreal Impact, his assistant, of course, are Bojan and Samuel Piet. And of course, Raitala is a Finnish international. He will be missing some time this summer, at least 2 weeks for sure. Well, at least a month with the training camp and everything for the Euro. So we will see Samuel Piet with the armband at some point. But Duane, that's some question that some people are raising in Montreal. Why isn't the Quebecer guy getting the captaincy? Oh, why is it the other guy who's maybe a bit older and a different mentality? And he didn't negotiate a new contract or new things, and it wasn't the Piet. Yes, there were some things, and last year, if you remember, you can go to the sportspodcastingnetwork.com. One of the most read article of 2019 was about Piet's comments that Europe is always a destination if necessary. So all those things mixed together, people are wondering if there's something there. And here's my opinion, Duane. Here's my hot take.
Sure.
It doesn't matter. Does it really matter who wears the plastic armband or the elastic armband? Does it really matter in 2020 when basically every player on the pitch gets to talk to the referee at some point during the 90 minutes?
It only matters if you'd have to get inside Samuel Piet's head to know whether it matters. It can only have a negative effect. I would be almost inclined to never name a captain if I managed a team. Obviously you have to have one of the day, but I would be inclined to rotate it. Which is what the Impact did the last couple of years, and Piet's worn it.
Well, since Bernier retired, yes, it was Piatti often, and then Piet from time to time. Raitala had it a few times, depending on who was injured or not. But Piatti was a designated captain, I guess, but he was injured last year. So yeah.
Unless there's a player that is so obvious. In Toronto's case, Michael Bradley is clearly the captain, although we'll see who wears it in his absence.
Patrice Bernier, obviously, in Montreal a couple of years ago, is a good example of what you're saying.
Yeah, we suspect it in Toronto. It will probably be Gonzalez. Maybe is who we're thinking it will probably be here, but they haven't named anything. We don't know what it's going to be. But again, I think it really has to either be obvious or no one. That it's just a rotation, because it really is not a big deal unless it matters to the player. And if it matters to the player and you don't name him the captain, then maybe you have a problem on your hands. But we don't know that, so we're speculating if we're talking about this. Really, if you're inside Piet's head, if he's throwing chairs around his house because he didn't get the armband, then maybe he's not the leader that we thought he was anyway.
But I think he's fine with it. And I said Bojan, it's actually Evan Bush, the other assistant of the Montreal Impact captaincy, for whatever that's worth. But speaking of the Montreal Impact, Rudy Camacho might be out for 4 to 6 weeks, like I mentioned last week. It was mentioned during the broadcast of the CONCACAF Champions League game, too. It seemed to be a knee injury, and it is the case 4 to 6 weeks absence for the French central defender of the Montreal Impact. A badly timed injury. We know that the Montreal Impact's backline is not the most deep, and injuries could be a factor heading into the reverse leg at home of the CONCACAF Champions League round of 16 game. Good thing though, a player that actually was really dangerous for Saprissa versus Montreal in the second half when he came in, Michael Barrantes, will be missing this game. Also, we figured injuries could be a danger, but good news is we haven't heard Kyoto's going to be out, and we haven't heard Okonkwo is going to be out for this game yet. So at least there's positive, but Camacho injured. Same for Piatti. Not the one that left, the one that came. Pablo of his first name.
Yeah, well, in shocking news, water wet, that the guy that with an injury history is injured. This is the Achilles heel, and we're going to talk about Toronto in detail later on in this week. But yeah, that's their season is going to be. I did a preview podcast for some guys down in the States, Chicago-based podcast last week, where I did a hyper focus on Toronto, and I kept saying the phrase, it depends on their injuries. Can they stay healthy? That should be on the badge for TFC this year. Instead of like all for one, it should say, can we stay healthy?
Instead of all for one, like Medicare for all.
Yeah, that's the key. That is absolutely Toronto's key. If they are healthy, they are absolutely a contending team. If they are not, they might miss the playoffs.
They shouldn't be sponsored by BMO. They should be sponsored by Sick Kids or something. I'm just saying Sick Kids because it's a very close hospital from where BMO Field is, but just name another hospital. That should be the sponsor of Toronto. But you're right in that it will be interesting this week when we talk about the Eastern Conference and go in deep into our predictions. Of course, now there's another rumor happening in Major League Soccer. A familiar name for U.S. men's national team fan, but maybe not for the right reasons. A certain player who, yes, has American links, but decided to represent Italy, Giuseppe Rossi, could be on his way to Major League Soccer.
Giuseppe is such a great Italian name. I always like it when Italians are named Giuseppe for some reason. Anyway,
well, when you know that it's basically, what is it like? What is the English? Is it Jonathan?
Yeah,
isn't it Jonathan?
Jonathan, yeah, it's something like that. So. It's like
or Joe. Anyways, doesn't matter.
Yeah, Anyway, Giuseppe is. I don't know how many American fans are still holding a burn for him that still are angry about that. It was a long time ago that happened. That was a big topic of conversation. He was the most hated man on Big Soccer. And the fact that I just dropped Big Soccer into the conversation kind of tells you how long ago it was now. Said I've never had the career that we expected from him at the time. I would call him the U.S.'s Owen Hargreaves because they kind of were happening at the same time, except for Owen Hargreaves actually had a decent career.
I was going to say, Owen Hargreaves was a bit better than Rossi at the end of the day, but Rossi had his time too. But,
yeah, look, he's been rumored to come back to MLS for years. He was born in the United States. He's American in every way. He just decided to use his heritage to represent Italy. Didn't work out for him, really. Probably should have stayed with the U.S., although I don't know how much he would have represented them. And I don't know what kind of impact he'll have in Major League Soccer and RSL, but I do know that RSL is an organization that always surprises. Never discount RSL. Their era of being a contending team, a championship contending team, is likely over. They would need to catch lightning in a bottle to be at the top. But I don't think that club is ever going to be at the bottom either. They're well run, and if they're bringing him in, then they must feel that they can get value from him. So that's about all I'll say with that. But
I agree, though. Through all the Mike Petke thing last year, and through throughout the different storms that RSL weathered of the last 4 or 5 years, there was always in playoff contention. They never really hit the bottom of the barrel, not even close to it. They were all like, oh well, they find a situation, they find a solution. And yeah, I mean, that's what I'm doing right now, trying to handicap. And it's so hard to handicap the Western Conference because it's hard to see any team lose almost. Like, any team versus Colorado, no offense. I know Colorado did a lot better last year with Robin Fraser, and there's a couple of good pieces there. But every time I'm looking at another team facing them, like, how can you see Colorado winning on the road against the LAFC or even in Minnesota? Like, it's so hard to handicap in the Western Conference, and RSL is one of these teams where it's so hard to pinpoint where they're going to be. They could be 10 and they could be 4th. I could see both happening in the Western Conference this year.
Yeah, they absolutely. I mean, look, the old joke is that you're doing math to do your MLS predictions. Somebody out there might sort of say that you could just buy a dartboard and get as equal attention. Now, I would
maybe
disagree
more
with that,
accuracy. Maybe something that is totally made up with, I would say, luck and luck of the draw, basically, and the statistics and probabilities might be more right than the way I'm doing now because I'm putting too much thought into it. Some would say.
Yeah, maybe. It depends on what amuses you, really, is what it comes down to. There's no wrong answer here. There was a time in MLS history where darts was the right answer. You could make an educated guess. You could try to throw that dart towards where you want it to go. But unless you're one of those people on TV with, middle-aged men with spiky hair, then you don't really know where the dart's going all the time, especially if you had a couple pints. So that was MLS for a long time. And there's still an element of that in the league. There still is an element of unpredictability. San Jose for last year for long stretches. Vancouver fans called me all sorts of names, which they're inclined to do anyway. But they called me all sorts of names last year because I picked San Jose to finish one spot above Vancouver in the Western regular season. Turns out I was right, boys. But right. At any rate.
Yeah, some fans will like me this year.
But the point I'm making is that they came out of the blue to really dominate for long stretches in the middle, and then the league figured itself out. I think there is more element of predictability in Major League Soccer now than there was in the past, and that will reflect itself. I suspect the regular season results of last year will be a better indicator of where they're going to be this year than they have been in any other year, and it will keep going that way as the money gets bigger and bigger and the clubs sort of separate themselves a little bit. Yeah. You're doing math game by game, Kevin.
Yep.
I'm going to focus on trends from year to year is how I'm going to try and make an adjustment. I'm particularly interested to see whether hot teams at the end of seasons over the past 4 or 5 years carry that forward.
Well, that's interesting.
I'm not sure if they do.
I don't
know.
No.
So I'm going to test that. That's my little project for this week.
Well, one thing that I like here, we're just going to finish the show talking about this because I do want to emphasize that it's going to be a very interesting aspect. And if you are a patron, I really suggest you look at the prediction that I will be doing later this week. I'm going to do a team by team, just a few sentences of what I think might happen and the total points. But in the actual spreadsheet, you see game by game, and then it's mixed with the schedule. You see who they're playing against. And sometimes, I'm just and I have this one because I did Atlanta yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. Very easy 5 games. But if you are Cincinnati, if you are Colorado, there's stretches in the actual season where you're 4 or 5 games traveling or playing at home versus top contenders. There could be stretches of 4 or 5 games where you become winless, pointless, and those trends are easy to pinpoint with doing the exercise that I'm doing, which is a bit, I guess the point of it is to highlight the pitfalls and the traps of the schedule of each teams. In this way, it highlights it. So if you are a fan of Major League Soccer, you've been listening to us for a long time, I might not pick Kansas City this year. That's a possibility because I'm not picking with my heart. I'm literally doing a game-by-game analysis, and I'm just winning. I'm just putting winners, putting losers, putting draws. And at the end, I have numbers, and those numbers will be put into a table, and we'll see who finishes first. But it does give you an indication, Duane, of the trap and pitfalls of this schedule, and gives you an ideology, an idea, but an ideology too, a philosophy of which conferences is better. Will the East truly benefit from having maybe a bit more bottom teams than we think the West will? And all these things that we've been talking about for weeks, I'm trying to put them into game day situation, and it is fascinating. And later on we will have the most probably in-depth article that I have ever written in my entire life.
I'll give you a number that I did a couple years ago that will really play a factor in what you're talking about. In any MLS year, there is an occasion 2 or 3 times a year where a team will play 3 and 8, so that means they play Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday usually, right? So when that happens and the third game is on the road, over the history of Major League Soccer, that team gets 0.6 points per game. It is almost a guaranteed loss game.
Exactly.
It is a very rare that teams have been able to overcome that. Now, maybe now that they can charter to those more often, that might change.
Depends who.
It certainly is something to think about.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I remember just the impact. I stopped counting the 3 and 8 after 7. I just stopped. Like, okay, because you include the Canadian Championship in there, and you include other things. If you're an American Major League Soccer team, you include the League's Cup, which we haven't talked about because we don't really care. No offense, and stop throwing things. There's 8 teams in the Leagues Cup this year. Portland, LA, Red Bull, Toronto, Minnesota, RSL, DC, and Philly. And there's going to be 8 Mexican teams that are chosen with the results and the clausura, apertura, and all these things. So with all these games, and if you had the Campeones Cup for the winner, Seattle, you had this and you had that, you had the Lamar Hunt US Open Cup, the 3-8 or 4-10 I've seen also happened multiple times during the regular season. And this is another thing to take into consideration when you're doing predictions too. And that's without thinking of there's going to be a surprise here. We're going to see one team really playing over their head, and we're going to see disappointments too. And during this preview week, we'll do our best to give you indications which is which.
All right, I'll give you one thought on the Leagues Cup. I've tweeted about this already, so you might be aware of this. The idiots did not consult the Canadian Championship schedule before setting their own schedule. The final of the Leagues Cup, if Toronto were to make it, would be at the exact same time as the opening leg of the Canadian Championship. So I think all of us that hate the Leagues Cup and the stupid randomness of it should be cheering like that for that. Sorry, I know Montreal people are inclined not to, but if you're not from Montreal, think about the hilarity of them trying to get out of that.
They could play against each other in the final, so it wouldn't affect Montreal, right? Aren't they on the same side of the draw? Where are they? No, I don't know.
No, Montreal cannot play in the Leagues Cup.
No, but they can play in the final. The Canadian, the
Canadian Championship, yeah. Of course they can. No, they play the semis. They can't play in the final this year. Because they regionalized it, right? So
that doesn't really
as long as they
matter
keep a regional schedule, the last Voyageurs Cup final between Toronto and Montreal happened last year, which is unfortunate, but we play each other a lot. Yeah, it's the oversaturated derby at times. So that's my only thought in the Leagues Cup. As I said to somebody, look, if it's a nice day out, I'll go. Because the Mexican teams are fun to watch. But if it's raining or cold, I'll stay home.
Seeing players with numbers in the hundreds is always fun, and you might see some of them during.
Well, the Mexican teams took it more seriously than the MLS teams last year.
Well, the Mexican team qualify for it. The Mexican team have to win something or to get close or be a finalist to get there.
Technically, the MLS teams had to as well. It
was Portland's why is Portland there?
It was the top. They didn't last year. They just picked them last year. The way they picked them this year, it was the top 8 teams that did not qualify based on regular season finish. The top 8 teams that did not qualify for the CCL are the 8 representatives of MLS. Although I suspect that if the LA Galaxy had not finished in the top 8, they would have figured a way out.
Yeah, Montreal should have been in there, but because they qualify with the Canadian Championship, I guess they got a pass. Yeah. So, anyways, it is what it is. We won't belabor yourselves with too much Leagues Cup this week because it's preview week in Major League Soccer, and all week long we'll focus on the bread and butter of Major League Soccer, looking at the Western Conference like today, tomorrow, and the rest of the week. We'll look at the Eastern Conference. We'll look at more details. We'll give you our official predictions on Friday with graphic this year. You'll have images that you can save and put back in our face on October 4th and being, guys, you were wrong. I told you guys that Cincinnati would be the best team in the Eastern Conference. If that is what you're thinking, please go see a doctor soon. Until then, you can follow us on social media at Soccer Today SPN for the show, at 24th Minute for Duane, and at Kev Laramee for myself. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of the World of Football with a Soccer Perspective at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, all day, every day, weekday, that is. But until tomorrow, as always, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee, and we wish you a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.